Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sherry.
And together we are
the Traveling Professors.
Today we're going to be walking through the garden area of the Versailles Palace. And this will be the gardens, the trianons, as well as the hamlet for Marie Antoinette. It was just too big to do the palace and the gardens. So we're going to have a nice little walk through the gardens, actually through 2 seasons. There's some winter action in this as well as a wonderful summer. Now we're going to go out of the back of the palace, look at the orangerie over here, and go right straight down to the Grand Canal. And then from there we'll go over to the Trianons, and then to the Hamlet, and then come back. So this is not really a detailed walk through the gardens, which I believe would take another day to do just on its own, because there's all sorts of divisions and different sections of the garden that with fountains and all sorts of other things. But that's what we're going to do in this little section. But as far as the garden itself, the gardens at Versailles extend over 250 acres. And it's not as much a setting to the palace as an open-air architectural extension. Now, the gardens were originally planned architecturally by the men brought from Vaux-le-Vicomte. That would be Lavaux, Lebrun, and Lenotre. And then later on by Mansart. And so they added axes, vistas. Viewpoints were designed always with an architectural or statuesque point of focus, and trees and shrubs and plants were used to provide the background, mass, and sometimes color to pavilions, pools, fountains, and statues. There is a remarkable sense of pattern and formality. The garden style evolved over the years from Baroque to classical, and then on to the picturesque in statuary, fountains, and buildings. A lot of color disappeared with the reduction of bedding plants from 150,000 a year at the time of Louis XIV to more modest quantities under later monarchs. And this is basically due to the fact that all the trees that were planted have grown to these majestic heights that they are now. So the basic idea from which the garden designed evolved. However, it's never been altered. It's that there are 2 axes, one north and one south, extending the line of the palace terrace in either direction. The other due west from the same terrace center. Symmetry, and therefore, unfortunately, monotony, is avoided, and in its place is balance. Now, Sherry, my wife, really likes English gardens. I really like French gardens. So we have 2 different views of how we like it, but she loves the plantings. I like the details with the sculpture. And so let's look at the orangerie. Now, here's an aerial view of the orangerie, which is this area where we have all these various orange plants and orange trees and what have you, and then the storage area that's underneath here. Now, the orangerie itself was built by Hordouin Mansart from 1684 to 1686, and it replaced the former orangerie that had been built by Lavaux. This vast edifice, the presence of which cannot be guessed when looking from ground level, the south parterre, which it supports, is made up of 3 galleries encircling a parterre. In the summer, there are 1,200 palm trees, pomegranates, and orange trees that are brought out and placed along the paths. The central gallery is 508 feet long, 42 feet wide, and 43 feet high. Figures of a statue of Louis XIV by Desjardins. The lateral galleries extend below the ramps are 350 feet long. The orangerie, unique in its majestic proportions, maintains a steady temperature. It never drops below 42.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 degrees centigrade in winter or summer. Under the Ancien regime, there were 2,000 orange trees. 1,000 oleander and pomegranates were also kept here. The palm trees were added in the 19th century. And it's when you get up close to them, they have a specific planter that they're set in so that they're easily movable. Here's a view from the top of the terrace looking to the south parterre, which looks out onto the lake of the Swiss Guards. And you can see how pretty the plants are and how majestic it is. Now, I've already talked about the snowstorm that Sherry and I were involved in when we were here on our honeymoon. Here's a picture of what the area looked like with 18 inches of snow on it. That's the Swiss Guard Lake. And, of course, most of the plants have been, of course, moved back in to the orangerie. And then back up to the original, the summertime section, as a view over this. And then there's an equal set of this on the opposite side of the palace as well. So let's head to the central axis and start heading out down towards the Grand Canal. There's the beautiful view from directly behind the palace down towards the wonderful water feature known as the Grand Canal. And right in front of us is one of our first fountains. Now here's a picture of it all turned on. It's known as the Latona Basin. This group of Latona and her children, which is basically Diana and Apollo, is by the artist Marcy. Now Latona was insulted by the Lycian peasants, and she demanded justice from Jupiter, or Zeus, who turned them all into lizards and frogs. So all around this are lizards and frogs, and her statue is at the top. Now let me mention something about the water here. At Versailles today, these fountains are only turned on very limited amount of time. Most of them are never turned on. And they have special water shows that they will do at the Grand Canal and a couple of other places. But at the time of Louis XIV, there's not enough water pressure to keep these things running all the time. So each fountain had its own fountain tender. And as the king would come in, he would come in a specific direction. And as you saw a flag waving in the back of his carriage, the fountain tender would turn on the water. And then when he lost sight of it, you could turn it off. So when the king was at the palace, all the fountains around the palace were on. When he was gone, they turned everything off because getting water up from the Seine was a major problem. And they are spending a lot of time presently putting in new infrastructure from the old pipes. Now here's a picture of the fountain without the water being turned on. And here's a close-up showing the turtles and the other creatures all the way around it. And there's Sherry. And then down below, as we start walking towards the water, you have fountains that have a nymph with a shell in them. And then we move on and we'll head on down to the main center of the Grand Canal. Now, if you're visiting the gardens at Versailles, I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, they're free. Any part of the garden area is free. So you could take the train from Paris, come in, walk. Just don't go into the palace. They have an area you can just go and do the garden. You can walk it. They have a little train-like thing that travels around. You can rent a golf cart. That was 30 euros a half an hour. But Sherry and I walked, and we walked a lot. This was pretty extensive. And as you walk down this pathway, heading to that construction tower that they're using, there along those paths on either side of the center greenery, there are gaps where you can go, and there are other statues and there are other water features that are in them. So it takes quite a while. And then finally you get down there, and what we're coming up to is the Apollo Basin. Here is the Apollo basin with the Apollo fountain in it working. In the middle of a massive group that shows Apollo the sun god in his chariot rising from the sea amongst monsters of the deep so he can light the world. But when we were there, it wasn't working. So this was the view of it. They're going to be doing some cleaning of it as well. They were working on piping underneath it. So the whole basin was just basically being refurbished. And we're right at the top of the Grand Canal. So you have these lines of trees going off in two different directions. They have boats that you can rent and paddle around, but there's the view looking down the Grand Canal. Now, it forms a cross, and the Grand Canal, it measures 1,650 meters long by 62 meters wide, or 1,850 yards by 68 yards. In Louis XIV's time, the waters were alive with brilliantly decorated gondolas, and they had gondoliers from Venice who came in and took the people around the Grand Canal. They lived in a village known as Little Venice, La Petite Venise. And there is a little village here now, but that's basically for tourists to buy food, souvenirs, rest, and where all of the transportation devices kind of hub at this particular place. So if you didn't get on the train, or you didn't get a golf cart or whatever else, a bicycle by the palace, you can get it here as well. All right, we're on the way now to the Trianons. So here is where we're located at this particular point. If you go up a little bit on the Grand Canal, you see where it crosses. That cross area is known as Le Petit Canal, and it's 1,070 meters long, or 1,170 yards in length. But then we're going to go down this row of trees to the road and then turn right and head up to the Grand Trianon. Now here's a chart showing all the Trianons. So we'll do the Grand Trianon first, first, and then the Petit Trianon, and then some of the objects around it, and then ultimately end up at the hamlet, and then return down the road back the way we came. And this is what it looks like if you're leaving from the little village, heading towards the next street to turn right. See the beautiful cut trees? There's one of the golf carts that people rented. Those were kind of hazardous. Every once in a while, people would zip by you. It's a little disconcerting. But we had a nice walk. And by the way, you're saying, well, how far did you walk? Well, our Fitbit said we walked 35,000 steps in the day that we were out there at Versailles. So we got in a lot of work. Now we come to the Grand Trianon. From 1670 to 1687, there existed on this site a very small chateau known as the Porcelain Trianon, from its facing both outside and in the Delft blue and white tiles. Well, Louis XIV enjoyed retiring to the peace of the small domain with his intimates, particularly Mademoiselle de Montespan. With time, however, she lost the king's favor and the chateau fell in disrepair. In due course, the king replaced the earlier building with a pink marble and stone one designed by Mansart, to which he returned with his new favorite, Mademoiselle de Maintenon. On the king's death, the second Trianon gradually fell into disuse, his successors preferring the Petit Trianon. Finally, at the Revolution, the furniture was dispersed and all seemed to end until Napoleon. After his marriage to Marie Louise of Austria, he decided to refurbish it and refurnish it. Louis Philippe then had it restored, as did General de Gaulle in 1962, with the intention of using it on state occasions. It is a beautiful building. It does take a while to go through if you go through all the buildings. And once again, I will mention, not all the rooms are accessible for your fee to enter. They have a private section which costs an extra ticket, or you need a private guide for that. So if you're ever going and you want to see the whole thing, the private rooms are a little extra. As usual, Sherry and I are early. It's not ready to open quite yet, so we stopped at a vendor and got something to drink and then wandered around the exterior. And it's a little hard to get a total shot of because it's so wide, but it has two separate sides with a peristyle between the two. So we went around the back side of it, and here is the Petite Canal. You can obviously come up here by barge. The king could come up here by gondola and what have you. And there were people that had rented a boat that started heading up this way, but it's really, really pretty back here, and you can see the back gardens. Here's a view looking towards the backside of the Grand Trianon, and it was time to finally enter the building. Well, we got in line and walked through the entrance to the Grand Trianon. We come into a nice little area here, a little courtyard. It's not the main courtyard. And then here is the building, and you stand in line to get your ticket. And then once you get through there, then you come into a more formal courtyard. And the entry room that you come in is this beautiful table with the artwork and the wonderful chairs and sofas. And from this room, you then go out into the main apartments. Here's a chart of the Grand Trianon, and you see where we came in. Actually, where it has the entrance, we came in on the other side over here, came in on the back side, and did not see the first antechamber, second antechamber, and the gallery. We went right on up to number 6. So we're going to be starting at the mirrored drawing room. And you notice that these rooms run laterally. They're not bunched together. And that's so they can look out onto the garden. So we'll be the Empress's bedroom, the chapel antechamber, the courtier's drawing room, and then you have the peristyle, which joins the two sections. Then you have the circular room, the round room, number 11. And then we'll go to the music salon, family room, all across there, and then up to number 17. And you see what we're not going to be able, what's in the private tours, and that is the 24, that includes Napoleon's workshop, the Emperor's bedchamber, breakfast room. 19 to 27 are not part of the regular tour. You have to pay extra for that. So that's how this is put together. And one of the things that you have a little bit of trouble with is on the first room that we start with, which is the mirror room. So as you see, it's on the corner. So early in the morning, they have the curtains drawn. So it's a little dark in that particular room. And the same thing happens when you get up to 17, which is the salon of the garden or the garden drawing room. That one frequently has its curtains drawn on one side. Later on in the afternoon, they will then open it up. So depending on what time of the day you come and visit this, it may have may be a little easier for you to photograph or a little more challenging. So here we are in the corner room, the mirror drawing room. And you can see they have lots of furniture in here. It's just beautifully furnished. There's the chairs, there's the wonderful chandelier. And then you can see what it looks like if you can get a little light on the inside of it, how magnificent it is with the mirrors reflecting the light and how bright it is. So that is the mirrored drawing room. When you walk into this room, and there's no question that this is the Empress's bedroom, the stunning furniture, the incredible bed, and of course the little partition between the outer area and the bed area so that the courtiers can help dress her and what have you. Stunning, very beautiful. Now this is a picture of Napoleon's bedchamber. Now that was in the private tour, which we did not take, but they did at least sell a postcard so we could see Napoleon's bedroom at the same time, but it's in the other wing. Next to the Empress's bedroom is the chapel antechamber. So this is the little area where you would wait or meet people and have meet and greets with your courtiers, but through those doors is where the little chapel is for you to go and do a little prayer. You can see the little altar there. Just very, very small. It's almost like a closet, a chapel closet, but it is where if you want to pray, there's a chance to go and pray. And here's the last room on this particular wing, just before you get out into the peristyle, which attaches the two wings. This is known as the courtier's drawing room. And so you would have members of the court here waiting for you. You know, these antechambers can be anything. They could be where you serve food, they can have parties, they can have entertainment. So they're multiple uses. Looks like they have the same style of fireplace in all of the rooms with the same color. Just beautiful. Now we come to the peristyle, which is the opening, this wonderful breezeway between the two sides of the Grand Trianon. There's a view of it from the garden, and you can see it in the middle, and you can see how it's going to have a series of rooms down one side, and then you have this wonderful gallery that goes the other direction. And then here's the view of the peristyle as you would walk through it. And you can look to the entrance and look to the garden, and here's the garden view. So it's quite beautiful, wonderful tile. Once you cross the peristyle into the other wing, you come to the round room. And the round room is kind of like a hub because it leads down one section of the wing, but it's also the access point to the areas which are a separate tour. So you do have that. There was one room that was open on that area, and it was the Queen of Belgium's room. And so here is the Queen of Belgium's room. Since it's kind of on a corner, it has the part of the windows covered, but then the other side is open, so you can see the furniture in this particular room. So that was accessed off that circular hub. The next room and the other wing is known as the music room, but in this case it has a billiard table in it and a parlor table as well, and so it has multiple purposes. Next we come to the Louis Philippe family room, which is wonderful with the beautiful yellow furniture and the artwork. And actually Louis Philippe, who is king from 1832 until 1848, he actually reorganized the right wing of the Grand Trianon. So this side is pretty much his view of how it should look. The next room is known as the Malachite room. It's named after the green malachite candelabra and other pieces that were presented by Tsar Alexander I to Napoleon. And so you see the beautiful bowl in the middle of the room, and then you see some of the other malachite over there on the table. So it's very, and then these are very small rooms. It's not gigantic rooms. After you leave the malachite room, you then come into a room that is known as the cool drawing room. And then you head down the gallery where you have all of the art, and the final room at the end is the garden drawing room. The last room that we saw at the Grand Trianon was the garden drawing room. Again, it sits on the end of the gallery, and as you can see, it also looks out to the garden. Actually, you can look at the garden from different directions. You can look at it from one direction and then from behind the desk as well. So it's, as you can see, it's dark when we first came in, and then once we got a little different maneuvering around in the room, we got a lot better light. So you could see the beautiful light in this particular room as well well as the fireplace. And then after we finished here, we then went outside to walk down the side of the building and head off to the Petit Trianon. Well, let's get our bearings as to where we are going. So we are on the outside of the Grand Trianon and we're heading towards the French Pavilion. Then we will take a little sidewalk to what is called the Summer House, which is also known as the Trellis House. Then we'll go down to the Petit Trianon, then over to the Queen's Theater, to the Belvedere and the Grotto, then to the Temple of Love, and then we will finish up at the Hamlet. Walking towards the Trianon, the Petit Trianon, you see through the garden here, the next building. And this is known as the French Pavilion. It's set in a formal garden between the Grand and the Petit Trianons, and it's considered the architect Gabriel's greatest small-scale masterpiece. The pavilion was designed as a summer house for Louis XV and Madame de Pompadour. If you look in through the window, you get some idea of the delicacy of the internal decoration, the beautiful marbled floor. Unfortunately, this is part of one of those special tours, so you can't go into it. From the French Pavilion, you can see to the south what is known as the Summer House or the Trellis House, as you can see here. Now, it was just reconstructed in 1982, so it has not been around for a long time. It was badly damaged and left to decay. But now it's in magnificent shape, and here's a view, are the peasant view, since we're not on the special tour. The view of the floor and the fireplace and the walls. And it's wonderful, very gorgeous. Now we come to the Petit Trianon. Now this was designed again by Gabriel, the gentleman who did the pavilion and the little summer house for Louis XV. But he also Louis XV had the Petit Trianon built. Now that was given by his successor, Louis XVI, to Marie Antoinette, who loved it, visited it frequently. She was always accompanied by her children and her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. There the Queen, who frequently felt free from the stifling etiquette of the court, increased the feeling of informality even further by ordering her architect, Richard Meek, and the painter Hubert Robert to modify the gardens in an imitation of the countryside of her native Austria. And of course, they also built the celebrated Hamlet. And we're actually coming in on the back side of the Petit Trianon. You go all the way around. This is the main entrance from the front. And that was one of the problems we had because we went in the back and wandered around and got out of sequence with the way the rooms worked. Now, after the Revolution, Napoleon preferred to stay at the Grand Trianon. Pauline, his sister, stayed here for a little while, but she really wasn't interested in it, and Napoleon's wife, Marie Louise, wasn't interested in it. So it was just used sparingly, such as this room with a billiard table for Napoleon to play billiards on. It's really under Louis Napoleon or Napoleon III and his wife Eugenie did the house really come back to life. They really revived interest in it. So we walk in, there's the livery. This is the type of clothing that would be worn for the butlers and the staff, the male staff, as the house was in action. And then here's the music room, closer shot of the beautiful tufted chairs. And there's a beautiful internal central staircase. And this is a view from the top looking down, and here's a view looking back up. Then here we have another one of the sitting rooms with the guard sitting over there, making sure you don't cross the line and sit on the chairs. And then here's one of the bedrooms. And this may have been used by Marie Antoinette. It also may have been used by one of the other empresses later. So the interior is not as well equipped with furniture as the Grand Trianon is because it was, as I said, not revived until Empress Eugenie. Now where's the exterior? We're walking out of the Petit Trianon, and our next stop is the theater. Now, to get to the theater, you have to go back down the side of the Petit Trianon through the garden, and then here is the entrance to the theater. Now, it's not open except on the private tours, but thank goodness they have a nice postcard. So this is what it looks like on the interior. Now, it was built in 1780 by Marie Antoinette's favorite architect, Miquet, and Marie Antoinette thought nothing of appearing on stage herself, even in scandalous productions such as Marriage of Figaro by Beaumarchais. But in fact, only the royal family attended the performances. And the theater, hidden amongst the trees, is harmoniously decorated in blue and gold finery, similar to the opera in the main chateau. So you would only have the family coming in to watch this. And this is the best I could do, shooting through the glass door that they had locked in front of us. Obviously, not a lot of light coming in, but you can see that there is the central part of the theater. I would also mention that the stage itself is circular, so that you could have people underneath the stage, turn it so you could have Act 1, then they close the curtains, and then just turn it to get Act 2 on the other side. Not too far away from the theater in the garden is the Belvedere and the Grotto. Now, the Belvedere is also known as the music room. This is a delightful neoclassical pavilion that overlooks this little lake, which is known as the Grotto. And here's the interior, the beautiful floor, where you would have your musical instruments placed and you could listen to the music. And you're far enough away that if it doesn't go well, no one's going to bother you. And then here's the beautiful little pond that goes with the grotto. Very nice private location. Heading back to the path, we come to the Temple of Love. Now, this was erected in 1778 on a small island on the bank of the lake and the pond that was built for the Belvedere and the Grotto. And it's built by the same architect, Richard Miquet. And it's a very neoclassical style. And in the middle of it is the statue, which is Cupid cutting his bow from the club of Hercules. Now, this is a copy. The original is in the Louvre. There were a lot of people out at Versailles the day we were there. And as you can see, there are a lot of people in these first two pictures. But ultimately, they don't hang around very long, and pretty soon you can get really good shots. There's always stories about the courtiers coming out into this part of the area and wandering around the woods with their paramours. So it is a very nice little romantic position, which if you get on the little island where the pavilion is, you can look back and see the Petit Trianon. Here on the chart, you see where we're headed now. We're headed towards the Hamlet. The Hamlet was built once again by Marie Antoinette's favorite architect, Miquet, and this is built in 1783. It's originally 12 houses that were based on houses that were once in Normandy that formed this village. Of the 12, 10 of them still stand. The Queen's Cottage is linked by a wooden arcade to the billiard room, and you have this whole area where they had friends would come out, the kids would play, sheep changed into different clothing. They had dinners here. However, she did not spend the night here. She would have to go back to the palace before sunset to get back into the formality. Now, when we arrived, this is what we were hoping to see. This is a picture of the Hamlet as it appears today, fully restored. Unfortunately, this is what it looked like when we arrived in 2016. It was completely under scaffolding. And I have a picture from the old days. There's a spiral staircase, and that staircase has a tree in it. Well, that tree had outgrown the staircase, so they had to remove it. But one of its seedlings was placed in there, and so there's a little one growing up in it to this day. Now, you can't go into these buildings. I don't believe there's even a special tour to go into the buildings. But this is the mill. This is the backside of the mill, and they would have had in the lake. They would have had boats and gondolas to move you around. They would also do fishing here as well. It still has gigantic carp in it. This is the lighthouse, and then you come to the gardener's quarters, and they have the gardens planted. They have flower gardens. They have vegetable gardens, and you can see how thick the thatch is on the roof. But the gardener's building is the public restrooms on the site. So you can go in there and use the bathrooms, wash up, and come back out. And then on the way back, you come to a group of animals. And there's Sherry messing with one of the sheep. They're supposed to be descendants of the original flock when Marie Antoinette was there. So the Hamlet is really a beautiful place to visit, wander around, bring your own food, have a little picnic on the side. Well, Sherry and I are exhausted by this time. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We've been here since 9 o'clock in the morning. So we're going to walk back from the Hamlet through the garden to the Petit Trianon and then take this road down back to the Grand Canal where we will have a little late lunch, and then we will go back up to the palace and go back to Paris. So here we are at the little village by the Grand Canal where we stopped at a little restaurant, had nice pizza, nice relaxing moment, a nice little breeze. Then we turned and walked through. And on the way back, going up through the central area, we stopped at one of the little niches and went in. And this is an example of what we found. They were doing reconstruction work on this fountain with this colonnade all the way around it. And every time you have one of these separations, one of these niches, there's something like this in it. So just walking through the garden would take you most of the day. And then here is our final picture where you can see the back of Apollo and his chariot looking directly to the back of Versailles Palace late in the afternoon. So I hope you enjoyed our trip through the garden at Versailles. Sherry and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett on YouTube. It should be History According to Bob, but it comes up as Bob Packett. That's the easiest way to get to it. And please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much.